called up yonder?
482. 482.
482. And we'll stand and sing all three verses of 482. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. A couple of weeks ago, I decided to do a little series on Moses. Moses is a hard person to do a Bible study on that would only take one sermon, basically, because there is so much in the Bible on Moses. So the first week of this, we did the first 40 years of Moses' life, which was like one chapter. And then the second week, we did about the second 40 years of Moses' life. That was last week, which was 2 or 3 chapters. Tonight, we're going to begin on the last 40 years of Moses' life, but it's going to take us a couple of sermons to get through this. We're not going to get through it all tonight. So Moses' life is really broken up into 3 sections. 0 to 40 years, he was in Egypt. And then from 40 to 80 years old, he was in the wilderness, kind of fleeing from Egypt. That's where he got married. Jethro was his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and all that. And then the last 40 years is really where we see most of Moses' action from the age of 80 to 120. And, Moses lived a long time because he lived to be 120 years old, but his life was not that much different than ours. In other words, before the flood, people lived to be 900 years old and whatever. But after the flood, God said, we're going to shorten the lifespan of man because of the fact that if man has too much time, they get into trouble. So he's going to shorten it to 120 years. And that's about how long Moses lives, 120 years. We today, with modern technology and everything, are able to get close to 120 years. And a lot of people do. Now, the reason that Moses and a lot of the people in the Old Testament were able to live to 120 years, and we today have trouble with that, is probably partially due to the fact that our lifestyle does not have us being as active throughout our life as they were. That's part of it. And then also probably their diet had fewer chemicals in it than ours. So, they didn't really, you don't really see anybody in the Bible dying of cancer, or anything like that, because they're, hormone free and all that stuff. I mean, a bird is a bird, a quail, back then it's not, and then which, of course that gets into a totally another sermon, but, people are against hunting and those kinds of things. They have no trouble getting the package of meat, in the supermarket that looks good, that has been extremely chemically altered. But it did originally come from an animal, and then, how can you shoot a deer or something like that? Well, it's way more healthy for you. So that's why Moses was able to live 120 years. His body was no different really than ours. And of course, he had a long life through, he had a certain mission that he was needed to accomplish for the Lord, and God wasn't going to take him home until he was finished with that mission as well. So tonight I want to look at, we're going to begin in Exodus chapter 14. Exodus 14. So the part of Moses' life that I'm going to skip, just because if I did everything on Moses, it would take, all summer, is the plagues of Egypt and that kind of thing. We're going to look at him as a leader leading the children out of Egypt. So we're going to pick him up at the Red Sea. So I skipped several chapters there. Chapters 5 through 13 is him dealing with Pharaoh and the 10 plagues of Egypt. And those are, certainly worthwhile going over, but we're not going to go over them for this series. Now, if you wanted to study the life of Moses and get an understanding of what is going on, Moses is credited with writing the first 5 books of the Bible. He did not write all of the first 5 books of the Bible. The reason is his death is recorded in Deuteronomy. Someone else had to have written that part, of his death there in Deuteronomy, because, he wasn't dead and then wrote his own thing there. But the way it kind of works out, if you study it, Genesis has nothing to do with Moses. He doesn't show up until the book of Exodus. And then in the book of Exodus is when he shows up. And Exodus is, of course, the name of the book is Exodus. So they leave Egypt and they're in the wilderness in the book of Exodus. And, if you study it, and we won't get quite to it, they're basically in the wilderness for 2 years. And their Exodus stops when they're in the wilderness. Okay, so the book of Exodus stops. Then we have the book of Leviticus, which is all about the priesthood and that kind of stuff. Thus the name Leviticus. So not a lot about Moses there. We pick Moses back up as a leader with a lot of his stories in the book of Numbers. And in the book of Numbers, in Numbers chapter 9, they reach the promised land. But they're too afraid to go in. That's when they send the 10 spies in. Joshua and Caleb say, hey, let's go do it. The other 10, they send 12. The other 10 spies come back and say, we can't take it or whatever. And, then God gets upset at them. That's in Numbers chapter 9. And the rest of the book of Numbers is pretty rough because God is punishing them for 40 years in the wilderness. That's the rest of the book of Numbers. Okay. Then we get to Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy is kind of just a summary of what happened in Exodus and Numbers. It's kind of just a summary of all of it with a little bit on the end about them actually going to the promised land and being successful this time. So, we'll basically spend a lot of time in Exodus and Numbers here in the next couple of weeks to study the life of Moses here. And so I want to take a look at a theme here. Of course, Moses now is 80 years old. We have maybe a couple of 80-year-olds here. I don't know. I think we do. And that's, so we have at least 2 or 3. And, that's a pretty advanced age to take on the job of leadership. And we see Moses doing that here, especially when you're taking on the job of leadership of a nation. And, of course, we don't have a very good leader right now in the United States. But, it could be George Washington. It could be Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, whoever you think of. And, if you read the history of these guys, they had the same problems that, Joe Biden has today, in that the people are complaining all the time. Nobody's happy, with the leader. They're murmuring. Yeah. And that's what Moses has to put up with. A lot of people want to be a leader. They don't understand really what is involved in being a leader. You get all the complaints, and everybody wants to complain. And so that's the theme that we'll see this evening with Moses and how he handles these things, which is he handles it for the most part pretty well. So they leave Egypt. So let's go to Exodus chapter 14, and let's just take a look at, we're going to kind of pick up in verse 10, where the children of Israel are basically, they've gone out of Egypt, and now they're up against the Red Sea, and Pharaoh has decided to chase them. Verse 10, and when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians, than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. So we see right away, as soon as they leave, by the way, there've been all these plagues and stuff. It is, anybody in this, nation of Israel who doesn't understand that there's a God, they've got to be extremely stupid, because of all of the miracles that happened in Egypt. Now they get to the Red Sea, their backs against the wall, and they immediately cry out to the Lord, and they, blame Moses for the problem. Of course, Moses is just doing what the Lord said. And, we have a couple of different styles of leaders in the Christian world. We have the Moses style, which is very rare. Moses is a rare leader. And that is one who will, tell it like it is and, preach the Word of God the way the Word of God was meant to be preached. Because when they do that, they will offend people. They will cause complaints. And I'm not saying that I'm the best preacher in the world, but I've preached a lot of sermons over my 11 years that have caught me phone calls and complaints from people that go to this church or that went to this church that don't go anymore because they were mad about something that I preached. Not a lot, but some. But, there are, and then there is the Aaron style of preacher. Aaron is Moses' older brother, who is he's fine. He does what Moses tells him to do and everything. But when he's left alone in charge of the people, and the people want golden calves to worship, he just does it for them. Okay, we'll do it. Yeah. Then he tells Moses, hey, I took their gold, I put it in the fire, and out came this calf. Yeah. So, the people made me do this. A true leader will be unpopular sometimes. And that's the way it is. And so Moses is, he's just doing what God told him. God told him get the people out of there. The Red Sea is a big sea that they need to cross to get to the wilderness of Sinai. If you've ever seen a map of it, it's kind of right in the way. And they're stuck there. At least they think. And God tells Moses, look, why are the people stopped? Keep going. But the sea's right there. He said, just have them keep going. Just lift up your rod and I'll part the waters and you'll be fine. So, Moses, and notice in this chapter 14, the people murmur and complain, and Moses and the Lord are patient enough with them. They get onto them a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay? Because they are brand new out of Egypt. And when we look at the story of Moses and the story of the children of Israel in Exodus, there are a lot of spiritual parallels that we can make today. I would submit to you that a brand new Christian who falls into sin does not get punished as much as a Christian who has been a Christian for 40 or 50 years falls into the same sin. God will punish them more than these because they are brand new, and he is a patient, long-suffering God. And so sometimes older Christians will sin and they will get punished by God a little more than a brand new Christian who sins gets punished. Because God is a God of many chances. And so they don't really get too tore up at the children of Israel here because they know that the children of Israel are not used to the way things are going to be. So, in Exodus chapter 14, of course, the people murmur. And by the way, we follow the King James Version of the Bible. God parted the Red Sea. The Red Sea. If you look on a map, you'll see the Red Sea. That's what God parted. Not the Reed Sea that all of the new versions say that he parted. And what's interesting to me is if you look on the back of a Bible, many Bibles, I've always found this interesting. I've got it here in my Bible. I have a map, the route of Exodus. Okay? The route of the Exodus. I have one in the back of my King James Version of the Bible, written by a man, and the possible routes of Exodus, none of them in my Bible actually go through the water. I don't know if you can see that. They go around the tip of the water, not through the water. That's not true. The Red Sea is what was parted, and it was big enough to where once the water collapsed, it killed an entire army. So they went through the sea because that's what God said. Oh, that's too unrealistic. Yeah, well, a lot of the Bible is unrealistic to us. Jonah living in a whale's belly for 3 days and 3 nights and, all kinds of stuff. How about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego getting thrown in a fiery furnace and not getting burned? See, these are what are called miracles, and the Red Sea is one of those. So we see that there, and then so let's take it down to verse 21 of Exodus 14. Verse 21, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on both their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. The Egyptians knew what was going on. They followed them into the sea, which is a dumb idea. And, all of a sudden the wheels start coming off their chariots and stuff, so they can't turn around and flee now. Because, their chariots have flat tires. So verse 26, and the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, And the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. And the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of the Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them, but the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore, and Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So the first big test of faith for Israel, they kind of failed it. But the Lord delivered them. It was kind of easy on them. They get through the Red Sea. The Egyptians are all dead. And most of chapter 15 is a song of praise to the Lord for his deliverance to them. But if we go to verse 23 of chapter 15. So chapter 14, we have the children of Israel complaining because of they're stuck between the Red Sea and the Egyptians. Chapter 15, they sing a song praising the Lord. And then in verse 23, and when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. And he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them, and said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So in chapter 15, we see that they murmur against Moses. They also did it in chapter 14. Okay. But still they're given a little bit of slack. They're thirsty. So, God has Moses cut down a tree, throw it in the water. That makes it sweet. They're able to drink it just fine. And they are challenged there that day. And, the challenge, I like the challenge in verse 26. It says, if thou wilt diligently hearken, so listen to the voice of the Lord, and do all that which is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes. It doesn't really say keep all of his commandments, because that's an impossible thing for us to do. Impossible thing for them to do. But at least try. And keep the statutes. Basically, really just rely on the Lord. Then he will take care of them and put none of the diseases on them that he puts on the Egyptians. And, I really like that because, again, while I am not perfect, I do try to keep the commandments of the Lord. And, I try to not follow after the world. In other words, I try not to, get into the things that the world gets into. So, I don't go to bars. I don't drink, I don't go home with strange women, I don't have fornication with people that I don't know, certainly not a homosexual or any of those kinds of things. And so the least of my worries as I stand here before you today are the diseases of the Egyptians, because I am not involved in the lifestyle that gets me the diseases of the Egyptians. Now I do enjoy, bacon and ham and stuff like that. So it's possible that I might have heart disease later in life or something like that because of those kinds of things. But as far as the diseases of the Egyptians or those kinds of things, which are the diseases of the world, I don't have those. And I'll tell you, a lot of the people in the world have them. Even people that you look at and you're like, oh man, that's a healthy person. Don't be deceived by what you see on television or anything like that. Those people take pills for all kinds of diseases, because you read about it much later in life. You read about what they're going through. You see them after, after they get out of Hollywood or whatever. They don't have, a makeup crew working on them for 3 hours a day. You look at them, and you're like, ooh, well, that's all. That's a hard looking thing. He really did age, or she really did age. Well, it's just that they were covered up, for so many years or something like that. So, so God sends them a challenge here. Hey, there are some things you won't have to worry about if you do what I say. Now let's go to chapter 16. So let's remember the children of Israel complained in 14, and they complained in Exodus 15. Exodus chapter 16. And they took their journey, verse 1. And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Once again, 3 chapters in a row, we've barely left Egypt, and they've murmured in all 3 chapters. This is what Moses, the leader, is having to put up with. In this case, now they're like, we don't have any food out here. Anything like this. And so then we have the very famous story of God providing manna and quails for the children of Israel. Manna, and then he allows them to have some meat, when the quails come into the camp. And couple interesting stories, about things about the manna, which we're kind of going to skip the manna story for sake of time so that we can take a look at Moses' life. So I'm going to skip reading it, but I just want to cover a couple things in it that a lot of people don't realize. In the story of the manna, of course, this is manna that comes from heaven. The children of Israel are to go out and gather manna. Okay? And they are going to gather, and when they measure it out, because the story of the manna is a miracle in itself that a lot of people don't realize. When they measure out the manna, after they have gathered it, as it turns out, there is exactly enough for each person for one day. That's it. And they are told to eat it all that day. Don't leave any until tomorrow, because it will spoil. And this is God teaching them to rely on Him every single day. There's to be no manna left at night, and in the morning you'll get the manna you need for that day. And the reason that they say that is, and the reason that I say that, hey, they gather an omer for every person, basically, So there may be somebody who's really old who goes out and gathers and is not able to gather as much as like a really strong person. And a really strong person will go out and gather this big bunch, and this old person will gather a little bit. But at the end of the day, when they measure it all out, there's exactly enough for every single person. That's the story. Okay? And then on that 6th day, when they go out and the big person, the strong person gathers a bunch, the older person, maybe the weaker person gathers just a little bit, they find out when they measure it out that there's exactly enough for 2 days. And that's when they go to Moses and they're like, hey, what happened here? There has been just enough for every day. Now today there's enough for 2 days. And Moses says that's because on the Sabbath there will be no manna. So that's why we plan for it on the 6th day. And by the way, people in the United States of America used to do that when they took Sundays a little more seriously instead of having bike races and stuff like that, on Sundays. I can remember on Sundays, we didn't go to the grocery store or anything like that. The food for Sunday was kind of planned on Saturday. Mom would get up. She would put the food in the crock pot or whatever Sunday morning. We'd come home. We'd eat. For one thing, of course, it was 45 years ago, 40 years ago, or whatever, when I was growing up. But we never even went out to eat at restaurants. It's a waste of money, according to Dad. So these days, everybody goes out to eat all the time. But, then, we didn't do that. But, it was kind of the same thing. We kind of had Sunday planned beforehand because we're not going anywhere. And, at that time in West Virginia, in restaurants and stuff, you went anywhere, you couldn't get anything anyways. The grocery stores were open, but restaurants were closed and things like that. But times have changed, of course. So that's the story of the manna. Now, there comes a time when the children of Israel complain about having to eat the manna all the time. Okay? And because they have to eat manna for 40 years. The same food. And we look at that and we're like, how could they do that? Why would God make them eat manna every day for 40 years? Here's what we have to realize with that kind of thing. God never intended for the children of Israel to be sustained by manna for 40 years. That was not part of the plan. The plan was for them to be sustained by manna for about a year. Then they were going to go into the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, grapes, real big grapes and stuff like that, all kinds of stuff. But because of their lack of faith, they didn't go into the promised land as planned. They went back and had to wander in the wilderness. So guess what? You're stuck with manna again. It wasn't God's plan. They forced the manna on themselves, but they don't see it that way. But if they had just followed what God had said initially, they wouldn't have had to have wandered in the wilderness for 40 years eating manna. Just for, a year or whatever. So, they brought it on themselves, having to eat manna all that time. So anyways, the people here in chapter 16 murmur and complain, and God solves the problem again. How about chapter 17? Because 14, 15, and 16, after leaving Egypt, the people, they murmur and complain. Chapter 17, the Bible reads, in verse 1, and all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses and said, wherefore is this thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river. Take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So once again, the children of Israel murmur. And Moses is starting to lose a little bit of patience and get concerned. God is still long-suffering. Okay? This time, when God tells Moses to strike a rock, he strikes a rock. The next time when God tells him to strike a rock for water, he does something. Actually, I think God tells him to speak or something. He speaks and strikes. He does something wrong there. And we'll see that. That's after Moses has gotten pretty old and cranky because of having to deal with these murmuring, complaining people for 40 years because they wouldn't listen to him. Moses was probably hoping to get to the promised land in a couple of years, take over the promised land, and maybe spend 10 or 15 years enjoying his retirement in the promised land. But that is not the case because of the people. He's not able to enjoy any retirement or things like that. He's going to have to suffer with them through 40 years in the wilderness. So here again, they are provided with water. Here again, and Moses is like, man, he said, children of Israel, they're about ready to kill me. We got to find them something to drink. And it's a lot of people. So it is going to be hard to find a lot of people something to drink in the wilderness. That in itself should show you that it is a miracle of God, how he could sustain hundreds of thousands, even 1 million people in the wilderness through water, through manna, through whatever. That's a miracle in and of itself. Yet he is able to do that. If he's able to sustain them through the dry spots, he should be able to sustain us through them as well. And sometimes I think he proves us and tests our faith by allowing bad things to happen to us. Job loss, car breakdown, whatever, money tight. Do we murmur and complain, or do we call on the Lord and just rely on him to help us out? A lot of younger Christians do murmur and complain when the tough times come. In general, it's been my experience that older Christians, meaning Christians who have been saved for many years and they're 70 or 80 years old, and they've been a Christian for most of their life or whatever, and the tough time comes, they don't really murmur and complain as much because of their lifetime of experience and able to look back and see how God took care of them during the times when they did murmur and complain. So, we see that, of course, a lot. So then in Exodus chapter 17 as well, we see the children of Israel's first battle with the enemy, the Amalekites. So let's take a look at that story as well. Beginning in verse 8. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men, and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. So I don't know if he was holding the rod up in his hand like this, Of course, it's a long time to do something like that, especially if you're an older fellow, Verse 12, but Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the one other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. So Amalek, and he does do that actually, and Amalek tries to take advantage of the weakness of the children of Israel. What's interesting to me about this story is, the children of Israel are still really relying on Moses here. Because as long as he's got the rod up, he's holding his hands up or whatever, the children of Israel are winning. But when they get heavy and he starts to put them down, the children of Israel are losing. Part of this shows me that while Moses is a very strong leader, he still has the weaknesses of a human body. And this story and the story in the next chapter show us that even though Moses is probably one of the strongest, most heroic characters in the Bible, he still needs help. In this case, he needed the help of Aaron and Hur. They grab him a seat, they grab him a stone to sit on, and one on one side holding up a hand and the other on the other side holding up a hand. They need Moses' hands held up. So how else are we going to do this except for a little bit of assistance on one side and the other? And they hold up his hands to make sure that the children of Israel will win. So, he does need some help. Moses has a tendency as a leader to micromanage because he's a great leader. But he has a tendency, as a lot of great leaders do, to want to kind of control everything himself. And we see that in the next chapter. So let's take a look at Exodus chapter 18. So in Exodus chapter 18, for sake of time, because I want to get through this story as well, in Exodus chapter 18, we see Moses' father-in-law coming to visit him. That is Jethro. Okay? Jethro's got to be a fairly old fellow as well. Because Moses is now already 80. But Jethro doesn't have to be that much older than Moses, or maybe even quite as old. He might have had a daughter. Because Moses married when he was about 40 years old. So, this guy Jethro is probably about the same age as Moses, maybe a little bit older. But Moses has always respected his father-in-law. We saw that in Midian. Spent 40 years with him. So Jethro comes when Moses is in the wilderness, because Moses had already been in the wilderness for 40 years before. And it's in about the same area. Because when Moses saw the burning bush, that's the same mountain that he gets the Ten Commandments off of. The Bible tells us that. So it's the same place. And of course, that's where he was feeding, Jethro's flocks. So Jethro's close by at this point. He knows that Moses is in the area. He comes to see him. And what's interesting is he brings Moses' wife and 2 sons with him. Moses hadn't really called for them. I don't know if he forgot about them or what, but when Moses was going back to Egypt, his wife and his sons were with him, and he kind of realized this may not be a good idea because I need to focus on dealing with Pharaoh, so he sent them back to their father-in-law. So now it's probably been about 6 months or a year later, something like that, and Jethro brings them back to him. Zipporah and Gershom and I think Eleazar here. And so, of course, Moses is very happy to see his father-in-law. Talks to his father-in-law, all kinds of stuff here. So in Exodus chapter 18, verse 13, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto even? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, Because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, The thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away, both thou and this people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. And so Jethro gets up, he spent the night with Moses. He gets up the next morning, and he observes Moses probably sitting out somewhere in the morning all day long. All day until the evening, people are lined up to come talk to Moses about their problems. Jethro observes this. He says, this is not good. Because for one thing, there are hundreds of thousands of people. Moses is not going to get to everybody in a day. He's always going to be backed up. He's always going to be behind. And this will wear him out. This is too much for one person to handle all of the problems. And Jethro is right, of course, because Moses does listen to his advice. Moses is the leader of this people. Moses has the ear of God, and Moses is in charge of all of these things, yet Moses is humble enough to accept the advice of someone else that he respects and implement that advice, if it makes sense to him. And that's what he does with Jethro's advice. So Jethro tells him, hey, you need to learn how to delegate. You need to find trustworthy people. People that you know are of good report. and you need to set them over small groups of people and let them handle the small issues. And then when those representatives have an issue that they cannot handle, that is too large for or complex for them, let them bring those issues to you and you handle those. And so now you're kind of delegating responsibilities, and you will have the ability to do other things with your time rather than sit and judge the people the entire day. This is good advice. The reason that Moses takes this advice, because there is another time where some of the children of Israel are like, Moses, you're doing too much. You're handling too much. You need to let some other people do some things. And God gets very angry with those people. And he actually causes the earth to swallow them up. We'll see that in the book of Numbers. That's Dathan and Abiram. Those guys said, hey, Moses, you're doing too much. We can handle some of the load. We can do some things. Their intention is to improve their own standing, like politicians would do. Their intention is to gradually increase their power. Jethro does not have that intention here, because he tells Moses, this is what you need to do, but he doesn't say, oh, by the way, I'm the man for it. He doesn't even actually go with Moses. After this, he leaves and goes back to his house. So he has no, has no nefarious ideas with his advice. He just wants to help Moses. That's the difference between him and the other story that we'll see maybe next week or the week after of Dathan and Abiram, where they are very greedy. And so a leader needs to be able to discern, because Moses was able to discern with Dathan and Abiram right away. Hey, these guys do not want to help me; they just want to improve themselves. But with Jethro, he was able to take the advice, because Jethro doesn't have any interest in being part of the judging of people or whatever. He's just there to visit, and then he's heading back. So that's the reason that Moses takes this advice, because we see in verse 24, so Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50, and rulers of tens. And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. So he certainly has a great father-in-law, somebody who can give him advice, that kind of thing. And so we see here some of the stresses of leadership. When things are good, when you win a victory, when something good happens, everybody's like, yeah, that's great, But also, when something bad happens, you get all kinds of murmuring and complaining. So, and I see this in all walks of life. You see it on sports teams. Sports teams, when they're winning, everybody's happy. When they're losing, they fire the coach. There's a lot of murmuring and complaining among the team and the fans, or whatever, because they're not doing very good. But then you can take that same group of people and win the championship next year, and they're like, yeah, we're behind you 100%. Leaders need to be able to have a thick skin and to be able to discern, what's like flattery and what's, and take everything really with a grain of salt. Because the same people that are telling you you're doing great today are the people that will be telling you you're doing horrible tomorrow. There's no doubt about it. I've seen it to a small extent myself, in church. Oh yeah, that's a great sign. I've had, not mentioning any names or anything, a small handful of people in this church tell me how great and wonderful I am, and a month later or 2 months later, I'll preach something that they don't like, and they'll leave. I thought I was great. Well, not really. If you step on their toes, that's a problem, or something like that. And I've seen it. Again, not to a large extent. But over the course of 11 years, I'm not doing anything, I'm not doing something right if I haven't offended some people. Now, some people have been offended and come back. That's fine as well, But you see some of those things as a leader, and just to a small extent for me. But that's with Moses. So I want to cover Moses a little bit more, but not a lot of the major stuff, because I just want to look at him as a leader. So I probably won't cover the Ten Commandments or anything next week. I'll probably go right to the book of Numbers, when they started wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and see how his patience is really tried with the children of Israel. Because, we have presidents just like for 4 years or 8 years at most. And have you ever noticed how a president, I saw this with Barack Obama. I saw it with George Bush and Bill Clinton. They go into office, no gray hair or anything like that. They got all this energy. After 8 years, a 45-year-old man goes into the office of president, and after 8 years, he looks like he's 70 because of the stress of the job. I bet they're pumping Biden full of all sorts of medicines just to keep him alive. Because I don't see, and he's probably not doing much. I'd say he's working very little, because it's just a hard, stressful job if you're able to do it right. So, Moses does it for 40 years, and he's already 80 when he starts. So, if that's any indication, of course, his face shines because of the amount of time that he spends talking to God, which is good. That's certainly a good, skin, enhancer or whatever like that. But, I know he went through had gone through a lot of stress over 40 years leading the children of Israel. And sometimes we pick on the children of Israel like, oh, man, they're so ungrateful. They're murmuring and complaining all the time. Well, if you're going to give them too hard of a time, you should look in the mirror, because we do that with every leader. Is anybody here happy with the town event today? Especially after everything that went on, down in Vinton. Those leaders, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? Or whatever. But then later, they may, open up some new building or something like that, or, do something nice. And we're like, hey, way to go. That's just the way it is. And that's oftentimes the way it is spiritually as well. So, the Bible says, hey, don't, if a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work, and it is a good thing, and it is very rewarding. I can testify to that. But don't think it's always going to be a bed of roses, and don't think everybody's always going to be happy with you, because they're not going to be. Not even in this small church, much less in some much larger church or something like that. So it's, it takes a special kind of person to be one that doesn't really care that people get on to them too much or something like that.